sold to the cruel Duke for debts. But on wedding night, he did this. Everyone in London whispered that Duke Sebastian of Blackwood was a beast who had killed his first 3 wives. They said he was cursed, monstrous, that screams echoed from his castle at midnight. Emily had heard every terrible rumor. Now she stood in his wedding chamber, her white dress billowing in the draught from the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't come to submit. Hidden in the folds of her gown, her fingers wrapped around the handle of a sharp knife. If he tried to hurt her, she would fight. She would survive. The door handle turned with a slow, deliberate click. Emily raised the blade, muscles coiled, ready to strike. The door opened. Duke Sebastian stepped inside, tall and imposing in the candlelight. But he didn't advance. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he dropped to his knees and wept. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. 2 days earlier, rain battered the windows of the drawing room like angry fists. Emily stood with her back pressed against the wall, watching her uncle Marcus pace across the threadbare carpet. His face was flushed with wine and desperation. "The debt collectors will come tomorrow," he muttered, running his hands through his thinning hair. "Everything will be seized. The house, the land, everything." Emily's younger sister Lily sat curled in the corner chair, coughing weakly into a handkerchief. She was only 17, fragile as porcelain, and the consumption that ravaged her lungs was getting worse. They needed money for doctors, for medicine, for any chance at survival. "There is one offer," Marcus said finally, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. "Duke Sebastian of Blackwood has agreed to clear all our debts." Emily's blood turned to ice. Everyone knew that name. The monster of Blackwood. The Duke who lived in a crumbling castle on the moors, who never came to London, who 3 wives had entered his home and never been seen again. "What does he want?" Emily asked, though she already knew. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. "A bride." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Emily felt the room tilt around her. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Through the window, lightning split the sky, illuminating the desperate greed on her uncle's face. "You can't be serious," she whispered, but Marcus was already pulling documents from his desk, spreading them across the table. The contract was written in elegant script, already signed by the Duke. All it needed was a bride's name and Marcus's signature. "It's done," Marcus said, reaching for his pen. "The wedding is in 2 days." Emily wanted to scream, to run, to tear the papers to shreds. But Lily coughed again, a rattling sound that seemed to shake her entire body. They had no money for doctors, no money for food, no money to escape. She watched, numb and powerless, as her uncle signed her life away with a flourish. The ink gleamed wet and black on the page, sealing her fate. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like the laughter of something dark and inevitable. The next morning, Emily woke to find Uncle Marcus standing in Lily's doorway, studying her sleeping sister with calculating eyes. "Perhaps the younger one would be better," he murmured, more to himself than to Emily. "Fresher, more delicate. The Duke might prefer." "No." Emily's voice cut through the air like a whip. Marcus turned, surprised. Emily stood in her nightgown, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. In that moment, she looked nothing like the frightened girl from the night before. She looked like a woman prepared to go to war. "Lily is sick," Emily said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "She wouldn't survive a week in that castle." "You know she wouldn't." Marcus shrugged. "The Duke wants a wife. Any wife. If one is more suitable, take me instead. The words came out before Emily could stop them. But once they were spoken, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Yes, this was right. Lily was innocent, fragile, still had a chance at happiness. Emily was older, stronger. She could endure whatever waited for her in Blackwood Castle. I'll go, Emily said firmly. I'll marry him, but you leave Lily alone. Forever. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. The Duke won't care which niece he gets, as long as the debt is cleared. Emily spent the rest of the day packing her trunk. Her hands moved mechanically, folding dresses, rolling stockings, placing her mother's jewelry box at the bottom where it wouldn't rattle. Lily watched from the bed, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. You don't have to do this, Lily whispered. Yes, I do. Emily kissed her sister's forehead. And I'll be fine, I promise. But as Emily lifted her white wedding dress from the wardrobe, she made a different kind of promise to herself. She would not be helpless. She would not be a victim. From her mother's sewing kit, she took a sharp silver dagger, the blade polished to a mirror shine. Carefully, she sewed a hidden pocket into the layers of her wedding dress, tucking the knife inside where it would rest against her thigh, cold and ready. If the beast of Blackwood wanted to hurt her, he would find she had teeth of her own. The carriage rattled up the long drive to Blackwood Castle just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash. Emily pressed her face to the window, watching the Gothic fortress rise from the moors like something from a nightmare. Towers stretched toward the darkening sky, windows black and empty as dead eyes. No lights burned in welcome. The castle was surrounded by silence. No birds sang. No wind rustled through the dead gardens. Even the horses' hooves seemed muffled against the stones. Uncle Marcus had not come. He'd taken his cleared debts and disappeared to London, washing his hands of her completely. Emily was alone. A servant in black livery opened the carriage door without a word. He was elderly, his face carved with deep lines, and he would not meet her eyes. None of the servants would look at her directly as they led her through the cold, echoing halls to a small room where she was told to prepare for the ceremony. The wedding dress felt like a shroud as Emily pulled it on. Her hands trembled as she fastened the buttons. She could feel the weight of the knife against her leg, a small comfort in the gathering darkness. When they came to collect her, she was led to a chapel deep within the castle. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across stone walls. There were no guests, no flowers, no music. Only silent servants lining the walls like ghosts. And at the altar stood Duke Sebastian of Blackwood. He was tall, broader than she'd imagined, dressed entirely in black. His face was partially turned away, and he wore gloves despite the warmth of the candles. A high collar hid his neck, and his dark hair fell across his forehead, obscuring his features. He stood rigid, every muscle tense, and he refused to look at her as she approached. The ceremony was performed by a priest who spoke in a monotone, as if conducting a funeral rather than a wedding. Emily's voice shook as she repeated the vows. When it came time to sign the register, her hand trembled so badly she could barely hold the pen. Sebastian signed his name with quick, harsh strokes, then turned and left the chapel without a word. Emily stood alone at the altar, now the Duchess of Blackwood, and wondered if she would survive the night. The wedding chamber was vast and cold, dominated by a four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains. A fire burned in the massive hearth, but it did nothing to chase away the chill that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Emily stood beside the bed, her wedding dress still on, her hand behind her back gripping the handle of the dagger. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the castle. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, measured, coming closer. The door handle turned. Emily raised the blade slightly, ready to strike, ready to fight for her life. Duke Sebastian entered and froze the moment he saw her. In the firelight, she could finally see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sharp features and dark eyes that looked haunted and exhausted. There were shadows under those eyes, deep as bruises. He saw her fear immediately, saw the way she stood coiled like a spring, the defensive angle of her body. "Please," he said, his voice rough and breaking. "Please don't be afraid." And then, to Emily's utter shock, the Duke of Blackwood dropped to his knees before her. His shoulders shook. His gloved hands pressed against his face. And he wept with the exhaustion of a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry they forced you into this. I'm sorry for what I am." Emily stood frozen, the knife still in her hand, unable to process what she was seeing. This was the beast of Blackwood? This broken man on his knees? Slowly, Sebastian raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with shame and something that looked like resignation. "I need you to understand," he said carefully. "I am not what they say I am. I didn't kill my wives. I never even had wives. Those are lies spread by my cousins who want my estate." He took a shuddering breath. "But I am cursed in a different way." With trembling hands, he pulled off his right glove. Emily gasped. His hand was covered in terrible scars, the skin twisted and discolored, as if it had been burned long ago. He pulled off the other glove, revealing the same damage. "A fire when I was a child," he said quietly. "It left me like this, disfigured, monstrous. Everyone who sees me recoils in horror. So I hide, and the rumors grow." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I only need a wife to prevent my family from seizing my estate through the courts. They claim I'm incompetent, unstable, unfit to inherit. But if I'm married," he gestured helplessly, "you can run my household. Take whatever you need. I have only one promise to make you." Sebastian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I will never touch you. You have my word. I will never enter your chambers without permission. I will never demand anything of you except that you bear my name." Emily stared at him, at this man on his knees making vows of protection instead of possession. Slowly, carefully, she lowered the dagger. "You're not a beast," she whispered. A bitter smile crossed his scarred features. "Tell that to everyone who's ever seen me." Weeks passed in strange, careful peace. Sebastian kept his promise. He never came to her chambers uninvited. They took meals separately. They lived like two ghosts haunting the same castle, crossing paths occasionally in corridors, exchanging polite nods and nothing more. But Emily was curious by nature, and the vast castle was filled with secrets. She began to explore. The servants, initially cold and silent, gradually warmed to her when they saw she was kind, that she didn't flinch at Sebastian's presence the way others did. The housekeeper, Mrs. Brennan, even began to smile at her. "His Grace is in his study," Mrs. Brennan mentioned one morning. "He spends most of his time there with his books and papers." Emily had been forbidden from nothing, so one afternoon when Sebastian rode out to inspect the estate, she slipped into his private study. It was beautiful. Books lined every wall, reaching to the ceiling. A massive desk sat before the window overlooking the moors, and scattered across every surface were papers covered in neat handwriting. Emily picked up a ledger, expecting to find accounts of wealth hoarded, money spent on luxuries. Instead, she found careful records of donations, monthly payments to the local orphanage, money sent to support widows whose husbands had died in his employ, funds allocated to repair cottages on his lands, medical expenses paid for tenants who couldn't afford doctors. Sebastian wasn't hoarding his fortune. He was giving it away. Emily's hands trembled as she set down the ledger and picked up another document. Poetry. Pages and pages of beautiful, heartbreaking poetry written in Sebastian's hand. Verses about loneliness, about being feared, about watching life from behind walls of other people's making. One poem made her throat tighten. They call me beast, they call me monster born, but who decides what shape a heart must take? I hide these scars, I bear their whispered scorn, and love the world that wants me to forsake. She was still standing there, tears in her eyes, when Sebastian returned. He stood in the doorway, frozen with shock to find her in his sanctuary. For a moment, panic crossed his features, as if he expected her to mock him, to use what she'd found against him. Instead, Emily looked at him with new eyes. "You're not a beast," she said again, but this time she meant it differently. "You're the kindest man I've ever known." Sebastian's expression crumbled into something vulnerable and disbelieving, as if he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than a monster. "I'm just trying to do some good," he whispered, "before my cousins succeed in taking everything away." Emily set down the poetry carefully. "They won't," she said with sudden conviction. "I won't let them." The illness came suddenly, violently, in the middle of the night. Emily woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the floor in the corridor outside her chambers. She threw on a robe and rushed out to find Sebastian collapsed against the wall, his face flushed with fever, his body shaking. "Sebastian!" She dropped to her knees beside him. His skin burned beneath her touch. "I'm fine," he mumbled, trying to push himself up and failing. "Just need to get to my room." "You're burning up." Emily called for help, and together with 2 footmen, they managed to get Sebastian to his bed. The doctor arrived within the hour, a grim-faced man who examined Sebastian thoroughly before pulling Emily aside. "It's the same illness that's plagued him since childhood," the doctor said quietly. "Related to the burns, we think. Comes and goes. This is a bad episode. He could die." Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What can we do?" "Keep him cool. Keep him hydrated. Pray." The doctor packed his bag. "I'll return in the morning, if he survives the night." Emily stood in the hallway after the doctor left, staring at Sebastian's closed door. She could leave. Let nature take its course. In a few days, she could be a widow, free to return to Lily with Sebastian's estate to support them. Instead, she opened the door and went inside. For 3 days and 3 nights, Emily never left Sebastian's side. She bathed his fevered skin with cool water. She coaxed him to drink when he was lucid enough. She held his scarred hands when he thrashed with nightmares, whispering that he was safe, that she was there. The servants watched in amazement. Mrs. Brennan brought food that Emily barely touched. "You should rest, Your Grace," the housekeeper urged. "We can watch him." "No," Emily said firmly. "I stay." On the 3rd night, the fever finally broke. Sebastian's eyes fluttered open, clearer than they'd been in days. He looked around the darkened room, confused, until his gaze landed on Emily sitting beside the bed, exhausted but alert. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Of course I am." "Why?" The question seemed to cost him everything. "You could have let me die. You'd be free." Emily reached out and took his scarred hand in hers without hesitation, without flinching. She looked him directly in the eyes. "Because you are my husband, Sebastian," she said simply, "and I protect what's mine." For the first time since she'd met him, Sebastian smiled. A real smile, small and fragile and full of wonder, as if he'd forgotten how. 2 weeks later, Emily was reviewing the household accounts in the morning room when Mrs. Brennan rushed in, her face pale. "Your Grace, there's a man at the door demanding to see you. He says he's your uncle." Emily's blood turned to ice. "Marcus." She found him in the entrance hall, looking around the castle with greedy, calculating eyes. He'd grown fatter since she'd last seen him, his clothes expensive and new. He'd clearly been enjoying the money he'd gained from selling her. "Emily!" He opened his arms as if expecting an embrace. My dear niece, you're looking well. Marriage agrees with you. Emily remained where she was on the stairs, looking down at him with cold fury. What are you doing here? Can't an uncle visit his favorite niece? Marcus smiled, but there was something predatory in it. I've come to see how you're settling into your new life, and perhaps to have a word with your husband. As if summoned by the words, Sebastian appeared from the corridor, still moving carefully after his illness. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were alert. Marcus's expression changed when he saw Sebastian, disgust flashing across his features before he could hide it. Ah, the Duke. How fortunate to finally meet you. Emily watched as Marcus assessed Sebastian, taking in his weakened state, the way he leaned slightly against the doorframe. She could practically see the thoughts forming in her uncle's greedy mind. Your Grace, Marcus said smoothly. I wonder if we might speak privately? It's a matter of some financial delicacy. Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. My study. Emily started to follow, but Sebastian shook his head slightly. It's all right, he murmured, though his eyes said otherwise. She waited in the hallway, her heart pounding, until she heard raised voices from behind the study door. Unable to stop herself, she pressed her ear to the wood. Another £50,000, Marcus was saying, or I'll make sure everyone in London knows the Duke of Blackwood is mad, unfit, dangerous. I have friends in the courts, friends who will testify that you're incompetent. They'll lock you away, and your cousins will get everything. I paid your debts. Sebastian's voice was strained. We had an agreement. That was for the girl. This is for my continued silence. Marcus's voice turned silky with threat. Unless you'd like everyone to know about your episodes, your illness, how your own wife had to nurse you like an invalid. That's not very ducal, is it? Emily heard the sound of a drawer opening. Sebastian, defeated and exhausted, reaching for his checkbook. Something inside Emily snapped. She threw open the door. Emily swept into the study like an avenging angel, her eyes blazing with fury. Sebastian looked up from his desk, checkbook in hand, his expression defeated. Marcus turned, surprised, his smile faltering. Emily, dear, get out. The command cracked through the air like a whip. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Now, Emily, let's be reasonable. I said get out of my house. Emily advanced on him, and something in her expression made Marcus take a step back. This was not the frightened girl he'd sold 2 months ago. This was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she looked ready to commit murder. You sold me like cattle, Emily said, her voice low and dangerous. You were willing to sell my sister too. You took Sebastian's money to clear debts you created through your own greed and stupidity. And now you dare to come back for more. The Duke is clearly unwell, Marcus tried, his voice rising with desperation. Someone needs to. The Duke is recovering from an illness, you parasite, and he has me to protect him now. Emily pulled a folder from Sebastian's desk, one she'd prepared after discovering the extent of her uncle's gambling debts. Did you know I've been doing research, Uncle? I have documented evidence of your fraud. 3 casinos where you wrote false promissory notes, 2 creditors you never paid, and a rather interesting connection to a forgery scheme in Westminster. Marcus's face went white. You're bluffing. Try me. Emily opened the folder, showing pages of carefully documented evidence. I've already sent copies to the magistrate in London. They're very interested in speaking with you. Sebastian had risen from his desk, staring at Emily with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Emily turned to the footmen standing in the doorway. Remove this man from the castle. If he ever returns to Blackwood lands, if he ever attempts to contact the Duke or myself, I want him arrested for trespassing and extortion. Emily? Marcus lunged forward, but 2 footmen grabbed his arms. Emily stepped closer, her voice dropping to something deadly. If you ever threaten my husband again, If you ever try to hurt this family, I will hunt you down myself. And I promise you, uncle, I am far more dangerous than you ever gave me credit for." Marcus was dragged from the study, his protests echoing through the halls until the front door slammed shut. Silence fell. Emily stood in the middle of the study, breathing hard, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Slowly, she turned to face Sebastian. He was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. His scarred hands were pressed against the desk, and his eyes were wide with wonder. "You protected me," he whispered. "Of course I did." Emily's voice softened. "You're my husband, Sebastian. I meant what I said. I protect what's mine." Sebastian crossed the room in 3 strides and, with careful reverence, took her hands in his scarred ones. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do." Emily squeezed his hands. "You deserve someone who sees you, really sees you, and I do." For a long moment, they simply stood there, hands clasped, something profound shifting between them. The marriage that had begun as a transaction, as a sacrifice, had transformed into something real. "Thank you," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Emily smiled. "That's what wives do, isn't it?" 3 months later, the London season was in full swing. The ballroom at Ashford House blazed with candlelight, filled with the cream of society swirling across the dance floor in silk and jewels. And everyone was whispering about one notable absence. "The Duke of Blackwood won't come, of course," Lady Pemberton said behind her fan. "They say his new bride is a prisoner in that castle." "I heard she tried to escape twice," another woman added. "Poor thing. The man's a monster. Everyone knows." The orchestra stopped mid-phrase. The entire ballroom fell silent. Every head turned toward the entrance. The massive doors swung open, and the master of ceremonies announced in a ringing voice, "His Grace the Duke of Blackwood and Her Grace the Duchess of Blackwood." Sebastian stood in the doorway, and he was magnificent. He wore a perfectly tailored black coat, his cravat tied with precision, his dark hair swept back. But most striking was his face. He wasn't hiding. No high collar concealed his neck. His hands, scarred but powerful, rested at his sides ungloved. And on his arm, radiant in a gown of deep emerald silk, was Emily. She looked around the shocked ballroom with a calm, confident smile. Her chin was high. Her hand rested possessively on her husband's arm. They descended the stairs together, and the crowd parted like water before them. Whispers erupted immediately, but they were different now. Not whispers of horror, but of surprise, of reassessment, of fascination. "He's not hideous at all. Look at her. She's glowing. They say she threw her uncle out of the castle for trying to extort the Duke. I heard she nursed him through a terrible illness, refused to leave his side." Emily heard every word. She smiled and held Sebastian's arm tighter. They moved through the ballroom like they owned it because they did. They were the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, and they were powerful, united, undeniable. Lord Ashford himself approached, bowing deeply. "Your Graces, what an honor. I wasn't certain you'd attend." "My husband has been in hiding long enough," Emily said smoothly. "It was time for society to see what they've been missing." The evening passed in a blur of introductions, of dances, of carefully veiled apologies from people who had spread rumors for years. Sebastian stood tall through it all, and Emily noticed he smiled more easily now, the shadows in his eyes finally beginning to lift. Near midnight, they slipped away to a balcony overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of roses. Below them, the city glittered like a sea of stars. "I never thought I'd do this," Sebastian said quietly, looking out over London. "Stand before them. Stop hiding. You don't have to hide anymore." Emily moved closer until their shoulders touched. "You have me now. We face them together." Sebastian turned to her, his expression soft with an emotion that made Emily's heart skip. Carefully, reverently, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "They sold you to me to pay a debt," he murmured against her skin. "They thought they were selling you to a beast." Emily smiled, reaching up to cup his scarred cheek. "But I was the one who tamed the darkness." Sebastian's breath hitched, and then, for the first time, he kissed her. Really kissed her. Not as a duke kissing a contract, but as a man who had found something he never thought he deserved: love, acceptance, home. When they finally pulled apart, Emily rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "My beast, my husband, my Sebastian." "And I love you," he replied, his voice breaking with joy. "My savior, my duchess, my Emily." Behind them, the ballroom music swelled. Below them, London sparkled with 1,000 lights. But in that moment, on that balcony, there was only the two of them. Two broken souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to step into the light together. The rumors would fade. The cousins would be defeated. The future stretched bright and beautiful before them. Because love, Emily had learned, was not always gentle or easy or kind. Sometimes love required courage. Sometimes it required sacrifice. Sometimes it meant picking up a knife to defend yourself, and sometimes it meant putting that knife down to tend to someone's wounds. But always, love meant seeing someone for who they truly were and choosing them anyway. And that was the greatest magic of all. The end. They sold her to a beast, but she was the one who tamed the darkness. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here.